Welcome to the Quiverful Adoptions podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey. We are two adoptive mamas who have walked in your shoes, so we get it.
We remember the crazy journey of adoption like it was yesterday, and we are so thankful we get to share some amazing stories with you right here from the living room of our office.
Well, actually, we're sitting in the bathroom, but the living room does sound better.
Anyway, none of that matters. We're glad you're here.
So grab a cup of coffee and join us as we dive right in.
Hey guys!
Hey friends!
We're so excited about today's podcast, and we'll give you a hint. Casey, say "from another mother" 3 times fast.
From another mother, from another mother, from another mother.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so Kelsey Vander Vliet is a birth mom to her son Graham, who she placed for adoption 3 years ago. Kelsey is an adoption paralegal and is set to attend law school in the fall of 2019 and currently lives in California. Kelsey is passionate about all things adoption, in particular ethical adoptions, and educating adoptive parents on how to be considerate of their child's first family.
We love Kelsey. She has done such a good job of bringing truth and light to the adoption community from a birth mom perspective.
We love her because she brings grace, but she also brings a sarcastic humor. And so I particularly really relate with sarcasm. And so I really think she's incredible.
She's awesome.
Y'all stay tuned.
Hey guys. Hey friends. So today we're here with Kelsey Vander Vliet. Kelsey, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's just get started. Tell us a little bit about your adoption story.
Okay. Well, I graduated college in 2015, and then I moved home to Northern Indiana. I moved in with my parents just to save some money, and my goal was I was going to move out to the West Coast and kind of just start my life. And then 3 months after moving home, I found out I was pregnant, and I was just seeing someone casually over the summer that we had been friends before. So when I found out I was pregnant, he pretty much just split the scene. I was kind of left with no real options. And so eventually I came to decide on adoption. With the help of some friends and some people that really mattered in my life, I came to this choice. And I was about 2 months along at that point. So I had a long way to go. So I kind of dragged my feet on the whole process, but my mom was very supportive and helped me along and helped me pick a place to find families to pick and everything else. So I had a really tough pregnancy. I was really sick. I was really underweight. I lost my job because of it, and I had to start substitute teaching. And that was really hard because the kids were like 5 years younger than me. And they knew I was pregnant. They knew I wasn't taking my baby home. And it was a confusing time. So I picked this family. They lived about 2 hours away from me. And we got together once a month for lunch or dinner. And they met my parents, and we got along really well. We had a really good relationship, and I really liked picking early because I know some people don't like to pick early, but I really liked picking early because I had so much time to get to know them. And I felt pretty solid in my decision. I know I considered parenting a couple times, but pretty solid, and I wasn't really swayed by the adoptive parents at all. So I felt good about it. And when I had my son in May 2016, it was like the most beautiful day of my life. So it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Definitely. It was really, really beautiful. And just to kind of see my life transform in one day's time. From not knowing what's ahead of me to still not knowing what's ahead of me, but also being okay with that.
Yeah.
Because it's the most thing, like the thing that you love most is sitting right in front of you, and nothing else matters.
Would you change anything about the hospital stay or the hospital experience at all?
They were really, really awesome about the hospital. I think that they were made aware that the hospital plan is really up to me. And so I chose to have 2 nights with him. They had an extra room for like a day, and they really only took him when I was so tired I couldn't keep my eyes open. I was just like, promise you'll bring him back in 2 hours and wake me up. And they did, because I just wanted to soak up every moment with him. And they were really not only understanding of that, but very supportive of that. And they wanted that too. So I really wouldn't change a thing about the hospital. Not at all.
Now, after you placed your son for adoption, you have mentioned that you were in a really dark place. What brought you out of that dark place? How did you possibly move on from that dark place and now end up where you're in law school?
I think it was a solid year. It was a solid year, at least, of being just very confused. I'm kind of a textbook overachiever. So to be like beat down by grief and just by this confusion, and then by everyone around me kind of just waiting for me to move on and get over it, it felt like I was just stagnant and stuck. And so I made some questionable choices, trying in an effort to move on, really just, jumping into a relationship right away and just really wrapping myself in things that I shouldn't have been doing. But no one really allowed me to sit there and heal. So I think I got really, really depressed, really didn't know how to handle it, didn't know how to get out of it. At times suicidal and just really struggling, just really didn't know. I was just in this black hole, just trapped. So I think at one point I was like, okay, I need help. I don't know how I'm going to get it. I started writing in a journal, and that really did help me. I found a support group in my area just by chance, and I started going to that, and that honestly changed everything. I think that really was the turning point to see, okay, there's something out there for me. I'm not sure what it is. I heard all these other women's stories, and that gave me a whole lot of perspective to see that other women go through this too. We all have different stories, and we all go through these different experiences. And the main problem is that we don't really have solid support. And so I think that became my purpose, to go find it or go provide it. And so I think that's really what ultimately pulled me out of it, was just trying to create something that we can all get support from.
During that year after you placed your son for adoption, were you still living at home? Had you gotten a job while you were going through your grieving process, or were you just in a deep, dark funk and not working or anything like that? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I got a job pretty quickly afterwards. I worked at a law firm because I've been a paralegal for a couple of years now. I worked, but I cried on my lunch break. I went to my car and cried on my lunch break and just was so confused. I got into a relationship probably a month after, and I moved in with him 2 months after that. So I had never lived with a man before. I had never had this serious relationship before. So I was doing things like trying to make a serious relationship work, trying to work this new job at a law firm, trying to explore this new grief and get through it. And all these things at once just really backfired on me.
One of the things that have blown our mind about your adoption story is that you have a bachelor's degree. And I know a lot of adoptive families, when they come into adoption, so hopeful adoptive families who haven't even started the process yet, it blows their mind. One of the reasons it blows their mind to think about an open adoption is just because they have this terrible concept of what birth moms look like or expected moms look like. So when we talk about the fact that you have a bachelor's degree, it's not the normal when hopeful adoptive families are thinking about walking into adoption. Can you speak just a little bit about that?
So I've been told a million times, like, you're not a typical birth mom. And I'm just like, well, I know a lot of women that are birth moms that are have really similar stories to me. And they, they're educated and whatever. And it doesn't make us better or worse. But I think that the most important thing that ties us all together is that we chose to place. I'm not a typical birth mom, I guess, but is there really a typical birth mom?
Right.
You can't really put us in a box because anybody can get pregnant. It's not that hard. Anybody can figure it out.
Well, Kelsey, I don't know. I've been having sex for 10 years now, and I'm not pregnant.
Anyone can get pregnant. No, not anyone, but I feel like it's the people that don't need to get pregnant. They're the ones that figure it out on accident. Like,
I'm 10 shades of red, by the way.
Yeah.
God, I can't believe I just did that.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, so yeah, I think that most people are one step away from making a detrimental, life-altering decision, right? Some of us just take that extra step, and I think that, and some of us don't mean to at all. I'm not a typical birth mom, but there are some things that, because I'm a college graduate, because I have that kind of personality, that kind of hurt me in different ways than some other birth moms I've met, just from sitting in support group and listening to women's stories and listen to how they're grieving. I think where I'm at and what my personality is like, just because I am kind of a textbook overachiever, I think that it hurt me a little bit more with the guilt and thinking I could have done this or stuff like that. There were definitely other things in my life where I couldn't have done them, but that like self-talk was like, oh, you're not incapable, you could have done this, you're smart. But then also on like my healing process, I think people were like, okay, but you're Kelsey, like you'll figure it out. You've been through struggle before. You're going to make it. You're going to be okay. You're resilient. And it's just like, sometimes I felt like I'm not okay. And people kind of expect you to whip it around and make lemonade just like that. And you're like, I can't. I don't know what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah.
So a few months ago, you went on a rant on Instagram. This was in response to an adoptive mom who posted about feeling like her voice was being silenced. We love that mama so much, but we also love you, and we really want to address the bigger picture here. There's enough pie for everyone. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Historically, I think adoptive parents have had probably 99% of the focus and attention within the adoption triad. And I think the general consensus was like, these are the people footing the bill. So these are the people with the needs that will be considered top priority. So it's simple customer service, right? Well, most transactions in life do go that direction. Adoption is kind of a different beast. Like in law, for example, most everything is adversarial. So everything is typically me versus you or him versus her, etc. I think now we're seeing a shift. So the scene is changing and birth parents and adoptees are telling their stories, and it's kind of rough. It's really hard for some people to listen to, and it's uncomfortable, and it makes you question adoption and everything we've ever been told about it. So as a result, we get this pushback, and it's like being punished for being the natural underdog of the adoption process. So maybe people think that adoptees and birth parents are starting to get too loud, and we've been told this for 100 years, that our struggle is invalid and our voices are not able to be heard. The truth is, we've been waiting around for someone to hear us and help us, and no one has ever invited us to this adoption celebration party. So instead of waiting, 100 years more, we just crashed it ourselves, and now we're being heard. So I think when you're on the more privileged side of it, you hear something that feels uncomfortable, and naturally you associate it with opposition or an obstacle. So we have to work on breaking that reflex, because once again, adoption is not adversarial. I'm not your enemy. My voice isn't silencing you. And I would never intend to do that. And make no mistake, I want my fair share. and I'm not going anywhere. So I think that there's plenty of room at the table for everyone. Without everyone's voices being heard, a child-centered adoption really doesn't exist. We need you and you need us. And at the end of the day, it's about our kids being happy and healthy and heard. And I want to show up to my triad with unconditional love and my very best effort at every chance. So I think it's hard because you want to push away anything that feels uncomfortable, because I experience it too. And you have to kind of tell yourself, like, no, this is something I need to hear, and take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes you don't have to agree with everything that someone says on Instagram. You know what I mean? You don't have to agree, but at least take it into consideration. And I don't think you're being silenced. And I think after much conversation for like 2 or 3 days with that whole thing, I think there were opinions that changed maybe, and maybe like more understanding that came from that. There's always something going on.
Yeah.
So with Instagram.
Just as an adoptive mom, how hard it is. I follow a lot of adoptees and a lot of birth mothers, and there are days where I mean, just being honest, I want to stick my head in the sand and not listen to it. It would be a lot easier not to listen to it, because you read and encounter a lot of hard things to take in. But something that I heard recently was, and it was actually surrounding our kids and their stories, like to make sure we put enough mirrors and windows around them so that they are encountering people that have stories like them, but also new stories or like other stories and stuff. And so I've like kind of soaked that into my own, like as an adoptive mom, like I do need to be hearing from adoptive moms that have the same perspective as me, but I also need to be hearing just as much from these hard voices from the adoptees and the birth moms, so that, like you said, so that I can love my kids well. So important.
No, yeah, I like that. I think to add on to that, I think definitely if my son had grief and trauma and hurt from my choice to place him, you bet I'd be listening. And so I think when our kids are so little and you don't know yet, it's important to listen to others and just prepare yourself, prepare your heart for the possibility. It's not an omen. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but prepare yourself in case it does. You're there to listen. You're there to support. You're there to give them what they need. And I think that's just being a parent.
As far as your open adoption, what do you feel like your son's adoptive family has done really well in helping flourish help the open adoption relationship between you, your son, and them?
Really, they're really good at just hanging in there. I'm not real high maintenance, I guess, but I think that I'm pretty honest with them about what I need, what I am doing too. Like, I'm sure that some of the things I do sounds maybe crazy to them, but they just are like, you know what, we love you, and just hang in there. So, for example, I guess, let's see, a year ago now, I took a break from my adoption. I just was having a really hard time and going through a really tough season of grief. And I asked her if I could just take a break. We did like a 2-month break, and I didn't get pictures. I didn't really talk to them at all, and didn't see them. And it was everything that I needed. And I think sometimes you know what you need, but you're afraid to ask for it. And I sat on that question of asking for like 6 months at least. And because it's something I wanted to do, I felt like I needed to do it to take a step forward. When I finally asked them, they were like, absolutely, whatever you need. And we'll be right here waiting for you after the 2 months. And you let us know if you need to come back earlier or if you need to take longer. And I think like that's just the best thing that they can do, that they adapt to our adoption and not necessarily letting everyone else's affect them. They stay with me. They stick with me. And I think I couldn't have picked a better family, really.
That's incredible. So I think the key takeaway there is that our families need to be flowy.
Flexible.
Flexible. That's the word. They need to be able to be flexible and just meet your needs where they are.
Yeah.
It can change.
Yeah, definitely. I think, everybody's adoption is unique to them, and definitely just listening to them and what they need emotionally, mentally, that's going to be your best bet. Some people are a little more emotional than others. Some people need more, some people need less, but really like reading them and figuring that out and analyzing that and seeing how it fits with your relationship is good. It's healthy.
Your story matters. Creating your adoption profile book is one of the most important aspects of your adoption journey. It is the first and usually only opportunity for you to share your story with a potential expectant family, and Arrow and Root is here to help make that process as easy as possible. Having a professionally designed profile book that is expectant parent focused will help you stand out and bring you comfort in knowing your book communicates who you are as a family in the best way possible. Allow Arrow and Root to help you make a great and lasting first impression. It means everything.
Kelsey, has there ever been a time in your open adoption where you felt like you needed to raise your hand and say, I don't feel like this need is being met, or can we do things differently here with the adoptive family?
Yeah, I think there has. I'm trying to remember it.
Or Kelsey, if you can't remember a time in your specific adoption story, you used to work as an adoption counselor in an adoption agency.
Yeah.
So can you think of a time where you've had to help mediate the conversation between a birth mom and their child's adoptive family?
Yeah, the biggest conversation I've had with adoptive parents, I used to help teach an adoptive parent education course that we had at our agency in Indianapolis. The biggest thing I would have is these repeat families coming back and they say, we're really scared to have an open adoption because our first adoption, she doesn't want contact, so we don't want the other child to feel jealous or we don't want them to hurt, because one kid gets an open adoption and the other doesn't. And I think this is where I feel like I can step in and kind of talk to them and say, you can't punish one or the other. And there's plenty of things that you can do. Everything to me can be a teaching moment. You can teach them about grief and about how hard it must be, and empathy. And I know that they don't have to be grateful. They don't have to understand, because you're not going to understand exactly what she went through. You're not going to understand why she doesn't want to talk to you when you're a child either. But I think you have to realize as parents, your kids are going to hurt sometimes. And your job as a parent isn't to not make them hurt. It isn't to sugarcoat or cover up things. Your job as a parent is to clean up the mess and to help them learn how to clean up the mess and how to help them move forward. So I think the biggest thing for me with that is just, not punishing one child for the actions of another, and not punishing one birth mom for the actions of another either.
Amen. One of our followers asked, what are some practical ways that families can show their child's their child's birth mom love?
Ooh, okay. I think this goes back also to analyzing that person, because as we know, people have different love languages and they take different things from different experiences. And so I think really building that relationship and getting to know her as best as you can, and kind of evaluating, what does she like? What does she love? How does she receive love? I think honoring her is something though that everybody can receive love from. So I've heard a couple of things like yesterday I read something that said you can keep a picture of her in their nursery or something. And really that's like just the start of it. You don't have to do any one thing, but just talking about her and having the thing that I've loved the most in my adoption thus far is he knows who I am now. And that's my biggest fear really, is that someday, he's just not going to know me really well. But we FaceTime now that I'm out in California, and he knows who I am. He says my name. He tells me that he loves me, and he's not even 3 years old. So, developing that relationship, you have to help that relationship along, because at 3 years old, it's not like he's returning my texts or returning my calls. You know what I mean? So honoring her and keeping her present when she's not physically there, keeping her in the home, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Kelsey, how do you keep emotions of like jealousy or insecurities at bay? I think that that's one thing that a lot of adoptive families really struggle with. And I'm sure, I don't know because I'm not a birth mom, but I'm sure that birth moms likely struggle with that as well. Do you think that that's true?
I always talk to birth moms when I talk about this subject, and we kind of relate it back to our the last stage of the grief process, which is acceptance. And acceptance happens many, many times in our life, in grief, in everything, because at some point there's going to be something that you can't change, and you're going to have to accept it. I did have more of it earlier on with the adoptive mother, because it's natural, she's doing what I couldn't do. So of course there's jealousy and insecurity, and maybe I see a lot of maybe older birth moms that already have children that have jealousy, as far as like, I wouldn't really parent that way. For me, I had to sit there with myself and say, listen, this is something you're going to have to accept. You can't change it. There's nothing you can do. And it's not the end of the world. You're going to have to just move on and get over it. And then you kind of, once you move out of that space where you're harboring something in your heart, I think you really grow, and you learn, and you move into a place of love and empathy and understanding for that other person. And you grow your relationship that way.
So switching gears, your Instagram handle @FromAnotherMother, which Casey and I can't say without laughing. How did you come up with that Instagram handle, and how has it helped you with your grieving process post-placement?
I'm trying to remember how I came up with it, and I don't know, because I have a blog, FromAnotherMother.com, and I came up with that first, and then I changed my Instagram handle later. I don't remember how I came up with it, but I do think it's still relevant with me.
Absolutely.
Because I'm a mother, right? Because once you have a child, you're a mother, however that child comes to you, and you're never going to not be a mother. But my motherhood is different. And so I think like From Another Mother is like, maybe you've never heard something like this before, and this is a different perspective. And it helps me because my motherhood is different, but it still exists. Gives me some validation, I guess.
Yeah. Kelsey, we love following you because I just feel like you share in my sarcastic humor, and I love you for that. I love your sarcasm. What can our listeners expect to hear from following along with your profile?
Okay. I'm very cynical, and I think I've been through a lot in my life, not just my adoption, I've had a lot of other struggles as well. And I think my brother and I growing up, this was the only way that we knew how to deal with things, was humor. So I've definitely taken that into adulthood with me, and it's helped me. It's definitely a coping mechanism for many people. Following along with me, buckle up, I guess. I don't know. Some people really say, I've heard a lot that people don't like my delivery of things because I'm too harsh, or I don't know. I don't censor things for people. But I also never intend to hurt people either. So yeah, I think that's one thing to keep in mind. But following on with me, I talk a lot about ethics. I'm like super passionate about keeping the ethical standards high in adoption. I talk about some adoptive parent educational things. I just have taken a lot with me from the agency, and I learned so much about your process as adoptive parents and how to work with you better. The law and ethics and everything like that, that's where my interest lies. So I do a lot of work kind of behind the scenes on that. I'm in California now, so I work at a law firm. I'm going to law school in the fall. So I think, if you want to learn about the things that people are doing in the adoption industry that are really shady and really backwards and kind of gossipy and juicy, I think you should follow me because that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
You're like the e-news of adoption.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I am People Magazine. Yes.
Well, Kelsey, do you have any last thoughts for our community?
Oh, I don't know. Not really.
Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We have thoroughly enjoyed just getting to know you over the last year. We love everything that you're about.
Thank you. I love you guys.
Have you heard about the Promise Summit? If you are out there and you're listening right now and you are hoping to adopt, or you're an adoptive parent, or you're struggling with infertility, or maybe you feel called to adoption and you just have no clue where to start, then you need to be at the Promise Summit. Casey, tell us a little bit about what the Promise Summit is.
The Promise Summit is a Christian conference for couples considering adoption, in the wait of adoption, and or families who have adopted. This event is packed with powerful speakers, incredible worship, and a panel that represents all members of the adoption triad, and is sure to be a weekend that you will never forget. Our hope is that you leave the Promise Summit forever changed and armed with the promises from God that will encourage you throughout your entire adoption journey.
The Promise Summit will be held May 3rd and 4th in Greenville, South Carolina, and we would love to meet you there. You can find out more information at thepromisesummit.com or on Instagram at thepromisesummit.